Rain poured over Seattle, turning the streets into slick mirrors of light. Jake, a 32-year-old software engineer, spotted a shivering dog curled under a bridge, its fur matted from the downpour. Without a second thought, he pulled over, grabbed an old blanket from his trunk, and wrapped the trembling animal in it. As he drove to a nearby animal shelter, the dog's grateful eyes met his, sparking a warmth in Jake's chest. His life felt solid, fulfilling career, a loving wife, Emily, and dreams of starting a family. But that night, a crack would form in his perfect world. At home, Jake shook off the rain and called out to Emily. She greeted him with a quick hug, her voice bright but oddly strained. "You're a saint for saving that dog," she said, handing him a towel. Yet her smile faltered, and Jake caught her slipping her phone into her pocket a little too fast. He brushed it off, chalking it up to a long day, and sank onto the couch, scrolling through emails. Then his phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number. Curious, he answered. A low voice, unfamiliar and sharp, said, "Your wife isn't who you think she is." The line went dead before Jake could respond. He stared at the screen, a mix of amusement and unease swirling in his gut. A prank, maybe? Some disgruntled coworker pulling a stunt? But the voice lingered, cold and deliberate. Shaking his head, Jake tried to focus on the TV, but his thoughts drifted to Emily. Lately, she'd been glued to her phone, laughing at messages she never shared. "Work stuff," she'd say, but her job as a marketing analyst rarely sparked giggles. He pushed the thought away, unwilling to let a random call unravel him. The next morning, Emily left early for a meeting, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. Jake hesitated, his pulse quickening. Checking her phone felt wrong, a betrayal of the trust they'd built over 6 years of marriage. But the stranger's words gnawed at him. With a deep breath, he entered her passcode, unchanged since they started dating. Her messaging app glowed with notifications, and at the top was a name, Nick. Jake's stomach twisted as he opened the thread. The texts weren't just friendly. They were flirty, filled with inside jokes and references to a recent trip to Las Vegas, where Emily had gone for a work conference. One message from Nick stopped him cold. "That night reminded me why I was so into you back then." Jake's hands shook as he closed the app and set the phone down. His mind raced. Emily had never mentioned Nick, yet these messages hinted at a history, a connection she'd kept hidden. When he heard the shower turn off, he forced himself to act normal, grabbing his coffee mug to hide his trembling hands. Emily walked in, humming softly, oblivious to the storm brewing in Jake's mind. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone casual. "Yeah, just tired," he lied, avoiding her gaze. But as she reached for her phone, Jake knew one thing for certain. That anonymous call had opened a door to a truth he wasn't ready to face. Jake's world felt like it was tilting. The word from Nick's message, "That night reminded me why I was so into you back then," burned in his mind as he drove through Seattle's morning traffic. He'd barely slept, replaying the anonymous call and the flirty text he'd found on Emily's phone. Part of him wanted to believe it was nothing, a misunderstanding he could laugh off later. But the secrecy, the way Emily hid her phone, told a different story. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to wait. At work, Jake's coding tasks blurred into the background. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He opened his laptop and searched Nick's name online, cross-referencing it with Emily's marketing firm. A LinkedIn profile popped up. Nick Harper, a former colleague from her old job in Portland. His photo showed a confident grin, and Jake's gut twisted. He dug deeper, finding Nick's public Instagram. Among the usual travel shots was a recent post from Las Vegas, a dimly lit bar, a cocktail in hand, and in the background, a woman who looked unmistakably like Emily, laughing, her hand on Nick's arm. The image hit Jake like a punch. Emily had told him the Vegas trip was for a conference, packed with boring seminars and networking dinners. Yet here she was, cozy with Nick in a bar, far from any conference hall. Jake saved the photo to his phone, his hands steady despite the anger rising in his chest. He wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. He needed more than a single photo and a few texts to unravel what was happening. That evening, Jake tested the waters. Over dinner, he kept his tone light, asking, "How was that Vegas trip? Meet anyone interesting?" Emily froze mid-bite, her fork hovering. "Just the usual work crowd," she said, her voice a shade too casual. Boring stuff. She changed the subject, asking about his day, but Jake noticed her fingers tighten around her phone. He didn't push further, not wanting to tip his hand. Instead, he decided to watch her closely. The next day, Jake took a bold step. He called the shelter where he'd brought the stray dog, now named Hope, and arranged a visit. Helping at the shelter grounded him, a distraction from the chaos in his heart. While walking Hope, he confided in Sarah, a volunteer who'd become a friend. Something's off with Emily, he admitted, keeping details vague. Sarah listened, then said, "Trust your instincts, Jake. If something feels wrong, it probably is." Her words stuck with him. Back home, Emily was out, claiming a late meeting. Jake seized the chance. He logged into their shared cloud account, where Emily backed up her photos. Scrolling through, he found more images from Vegas, none from a conference. One showed her and Nick at a rooftop bar, their heads close, her smile brighter than Jake had seen in months. Another text thread, synced to the cloud, revealed Nick's messages. "Can't stop thinking about you. When's the next trip?" Emily's reply, "Soon, I hope." This was fun. Jake's breath caught. This wasn't just a casual catch-up with an old friend. It was deliberate, intimate, a betrayal woven into lies. He saved the evidence, his resolve hardening. Emily wasn't just hiding something. She was building a separate life, one that excluded him. As he heard her car pull into the driveway, Jake closed his laptop, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure how to face her, but one thing was clear. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Jake's heart pounded as he heard Emily's key turn in the lock. The evidence he'd uncovered, Nick's flirty texts, the Vegas photos, Emily's secretive replies, sat like a weight in his chest. He'd spent the day at the animal shelter, walking Hope, the dog he'd rescued, trying to clear his mind. The shelter had become his refuge, a place where trust was simple and unconditional. But now, back home, he knew it was time to face the storm. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Emily walked in, tossing her keys onto the counter with a casual hum. "Long day," she said, not looking at Jake as she scrolled through her phone. Her ease grated on him, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside. He'd rehearsed this moment all day, determined to stay calm, to get answers without letting anger take over. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but firm. She froze, her thumb hovering over the screen, then set her phone down slowly. "Okay, what's up?" she asked, her tone cautious, eyes finally meeting his. Jake took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the table for support. "I know about Nick," he said, watching her reaction. Emily's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't speak. "I saw the messages, the photos from Vegas. You weren't at a conference, were you? You were with him." His words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it, her fingers twisting together. "Jake, it's not what you think," she started, but her voice wavered, lacking conviction. "Not what I think." Jake cut in, his calm cracking. "You lied about the trip. You've been texting him, laughing with him, planning to meet again. How is that nothing?" He pulled out his phone, showing her the screenshot of Nick's message. "Can't stop thinking about you. When's the next trip?" Emily's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked cornered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nick and I worked together years ago. We reconnected, and it felt exciting, but it wasn't physical, I swear." Jake shook his head, the words feeling hollow. "You hid it from me, Emily. You chose to keep this secret, to build something with him behind my back. That's not just a mistake, it's a betrayal." His voice stayed level, but the pain seeped through. Emily's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "I felt disconnected, Jake," she said, her tone pleading. "We've been in this routine, and I didn't know how to tell you I was struggling. Nick was just there." "Disconnected?" Jake repeated, incredulous. "We're married, Emily. If you felt that way, you could have talked to me. Instead, you ran to someone else." He stood, needing distance, and paced to the window. The city lights blurred outside, a reminder of the life they'd built together. "I trusted you," he said, turning back to her. "I gave you everything, and you chose to lie." Emily stood too, stepping closer. "I still love you, Jake. It was a mistake, and I'm sorry. Can't we work through this?" Jake looked at her, searching for the woman he'd married, the one who'd laughed with him over late-night pizza and planned their future. But all he saw was the secrecy, the choice she'd made to exclude him. I don't know if I can trust you again, he said quietly. And without trust, what's left? Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Emily reached for his hand, but he pulled away gently. I need time, he said, grabbing his keys. As he walked out, the door clicking shut behind him, Jake felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. The confrontation was over, but the real battle, deciding what came next, was just beginning. That Jake's footsteps echoed in the quiet Seattle night as he left the house, Emily's plea for forgiveness fading behind the closed door. His confrontation with her had drained him, but it also sparked a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. The betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was a wake-up call. He drove to a small motel near the city's edge, the neon sign flickering as he checked in. Alone in the modest room, Jake sat on the bed, staring at the screenshots of Emily's messages with Nick on his phone. He wasn't angry anymore, just resolute. He wouldn't let this break him. Instead, he'd reclaim his life, starting now. The next morning, Jake called Sarah, the volunteer from the animal shelter where he'd taken Hope, the dog he'd rescued. I need advice, he said, his voice steady. Over coffee at a nearby diner, he shared the broad strokes of Emily's betrayal, keeping the details private. Sarah listened, her eyes sharp with empathy. You deserve better, Jake. Protect yourself, but don't let this define you. Her words hit home. Jake realized he didn't want revenge in the petty sense. He wanted justice, a way to move forward without losing himself. By noon, Jake was on the phone with a divorce attorney recommended by a coworker. He explained the situation, sending over the screenshots and photos from Emily's Vegas trip with Nick. The attorney, a calm woman named Rachel, laid out his options. Washington's a no-fault state, but evidence of infidelity can influence asset division, she said. Gather everything you have, and we'll build a case. Jake spent the afternoon organizing his findings, texts, cloud backups, even timestamps from Emily's conference that didn't add up. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about ensuring he walked away with what was fair. Meanwhile, Jake threw himself into the shelter, finding purpose in the routine of feeding dogs and cleaning kennels. Hope, now thriving, bounded toward him each visit, her tail wagging like a metronome. One day, while walking her along a muddy trail, Jake met Tom, a shelter donor who ran a local nonprofit. You've got a knack for this, Tom said, watching Jake soothe a nervous puppy. Ever thought about fundraising? We could use someone like you. The offer caught Jake off guard, but it lit a spark. He'd always loved helping, and this felt like a chance to rebuild something meaningful. Back at the motel, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Can we talk? I'm so sorry. He stared at the message, tempted to reply, but instead, he muted her notifications. He wasn't ready to hear more excuses. That night, he drafted an email to Rachel, attaching more evidence. A hotel receipt from Vegas he'd found in their shared account, booked under Emily's name for the same weekend as Nick's bar photos. It was another piece of the puzzle, proof of her deception. Days turned into weeks, and Jake's life took on a new rhythm. He started training with Tom to lead a fundraising campaign for the shelter, channeling his energy into something bigger than himself. The work was demanding but rewarding. Every adoption, every wagging tail, reminded him he was making a difference. Yet Emily's shadow lingered. She called, left voicemails, even showed up at the shelter once, but Jake kept his distance, polite but firm. I need space, he told her, and she left, her shoulders slumped. One evening, Rachel called with an update. We've got a strong case, she said. The evidence shows a pattern of deceit. We can push for a fair settlement. Jake nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. He didn't hate Emily, but he couldn't live with someone who'd broken his trust so deliberately. As he walked Hope under the stars, her leash loose in his hand, Jake realized something. His revenge wasn't about destroying Emily. It was about building a life she could no longer touch. The shelter, the new role, the dog who'd become his shadow, they were his foundation now. Whatever came next, he'd face it on his terms. 6 months after walking out on Emily, Jake stood on a grassy hill overlooking Puget Sound, Hope's leash loose in his hand. The dog he'd rescued from a Seattle storm now bounded happily, chasing a stray leaf. The shelter's first fundraising gala, which Jake had spent weeks organizing, had just raised enough to expand the facility. Volunteers clapped him on the back, donors shook his hand, and Hope's joyful barks echoed in the crisp air. For the first time in months, Jake felt whole. Not because he'd won, but because he'd rebuilt. Yet, as the sun dipped low, a familiar figure approached, stirring the past he thought he'd left behind. The divorce was nearly finalized. Jake's attorney, Rachel, had secured a fair settlement, leveraging the evidence of Emily's deception, texts, photos, that damning Vegas hotel receipt. Jake hadn't wanted to ruin her. He just wanted closure. The process had been grueling, with Emily's initial pleas for reconciliation giving way to quiet resignation. She'd stopped calling, stopped showing up at the shelter. Jake assumed she'd moved on, just as he was trying to. But now, here she was, standing at the edge of the gala, holding a small envelope, her posture hesitant but deliberate. "Jake," Emily said, her voice soft but clear as she approached. "I didn't come to make a scene. I just need a moment." He tensed, gripping Hope's leash a little tighter, but nodded. They stepped away from the crowd, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses fading. Emily handed him the envelope. "It's a letter," she said. "I wrote it for you, but you don't have to read it now. Or ever." Jake took it, his fingers brushing the paper, unsure what to say. She continued, "I've been in therapy, working on why I did what I did. I betrayed you, and I'll carry that guilt forever. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for you to know I'm trying to be better." Jake looked at her, searching for the woman he'd loved, the one who'd lied so easily. Her words sounded genuine, but they couldn't erase the months of pain. "I appreciate you saying that," he said, his tone even. "But I've moved on, Emily. I had to." She nodded, her eyes glistening, and turned to leave. As she walked away, Jake felt a weight lift, not forgiveness but release. He tucked the letter into his pocket, unopened. Maybe he'd read it someday, but not today. Back at the gala, Jake rejoined the volunteers. Tom, the nonprofit director, pulled him aside. "You're a natural at this," he said. "We're starting a new outreach program. Want to lead it?" Jake hesitated, then smiled. "Count me in." The shelter had become his anchor, a place where trust was earned through action, not words. Hope nuzzled his leg, and he scratched her ears, grateful for the dog who'd been his quiet companion through the storm. Emily, meanwhile, sat alone in her car, the weight of her choices heavy. Therapy had forced her to confront her flaws, her need for validation, her fear of facing problems head-on. She lost Jake, not just because of Nick, but because she'd failed to be honest with herself. She started the engine, resolved to keep working on herself, knowing it might never repair what she'd broken. As the gala wound down, Jake walked Hope along the shore, the waves lapping gently. He thought about the anonymous call that had upended his life, the betrayal that had shattered his trust. But he also thought about the shelter, the new friends, the purpose he'd found. Revenge hadn't been about hurting Emily. It was about reclaiming his own story. With Hope trotting beside him, Jake looked out at the horizon, ready for whatever came next. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest act of strength is letting go and starting anew.